And here we go. All right. We are live tonight on Facebook. Tonight is a rescheduling of Monday's meal. And I say it this way, it is always manna to move one toward their mandate that we do here in the Walk of Dominion. Tonight's a very important conversation in regards to the issue of mental health and how important that is within inside of our different family structures. You all know that we've been sheltering in place. And if there's one thing that COVID-19 has done, it has revealed what's been hidden and concealed. Well, I say it this way, what lies beneath. And what I mean by that is many of the issues that are existed inside of our communities and our family dynamics, those things have been hidden beneath the surface, and they have come to the surface as we've kind of walked through. So as soon as you see this, I want you to share it, send it to a friend. A very, very important conversation tonight that we're going to have. I have two experts in the field. I want to start on the top left there, probably you all's right, with Dr. Tamarra Johnson, wife of Bishop Darren Johnson. She is a licensed clinical psychologist and teaches also as a professor in the field of psychology, serves inside of the context of the church and professionally at the same time. And so we're very glad to have her expertise tonight. She'll be able to speak to a myriad of issues. Good evening, ma'am. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Good evening, sir. It's good to be here.
All right. And then this gentleman here at the bottom of the screen is Leon Winters. He is a licensed clinical social worker, and also he's board approved in approving other clinical social workers, serves as a supervisor in that context. He is in the southern portion of the state, in Louisiana, I guess I should say. And we're glad he's here tonight with his expertise to join along with us. He does wear gold, Tamarra, but the color that he matches with that gold is black. He is a frat brother of mine, and so glad that you were able to be with me tonight, sir. Good evening to you.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. Glad that you're having it. Glad that you're able to join. I want to start out first, you guys, with the idea of how important mental health is inside of our communities. And you both know, as I will know, that it's pretty much a taboo subject, and that many people, we often feel like if someone needs to go and sit and talk with a counselor or therapist or a psychologist, that it is often referred to in our context as you one of them crazy people that got to go talk to the crazy people and that sort of stuff. And but really, we need the impact of what therapy does for us in terms of working through many of the emotions, many of the traumas of impact that we have experienced within our lives. Before I have you guys begin to speak a little bit tonight, I want to share my screen with you. And I want to show a video to both of you guys that our listening audience also will be able to kind of pick up on as well. And let me see if I can get that to work tonight. And I want to have you guys comment on it, if you will. If I can get it to work tonight. Let's see. Let me come back over here. And we'll get it functioning here in just a second. Y'all hang with me. We'll get it in just a moment. 1, 2. I want to share this particular video here, and we'll have it roll in just a second. My computer it's doing a crazy thing right now. And here we go.
I was always taught to be strong in this world. Told to never let my guard down because at any moment I could be attacked without a moment's notice. That my skin made me a target. Skin that has persevered through many trials and tribulations, from seeing my mama raped by landlords, to my father being beaten and stripped of his manhood, to my brothers and sisters being separated into jobs for this bigger system, my skin has always been under attack. Yet somehow we prevailed through it all, through all the lynchings, literacy tests, new Jim Crows, war on drugs, the gentrifications, police brutalities, food deserts, mass incarcerations. We survived and adapted and pushed to change because our very existence depended on it. Our very existence depends on this. This black strength. Strength that has carried us for decades, but is undermining an important aspect of our humanity and feeding in on itself. Being strong all the time took away our ability to speak about our weaknesses, our sadness, our mental illnesses. This silence is killing us. On top of that, we lack proper mental health care access and endure mistreatments by medical professionals who cannot relate to us in their practice. On top of that, we stigmatize mental illness to preserve this place of our strength, damaging ourselves, and among black children observing a spike in suicide rates because they may feel that their place in heaven is way better than their place here today, because when black life isn't valued enough for professional help, adequate housing, or even breathing, life here degrades in value in comparison to life after. Black bodies, strong black souls are floating through the wind, seamlessly letting go. Strong black bodies are screaming for help, but suffering in silence and being socially and systematically being put on quiet. Black souls are strong, but we do need help when we do fall through the cracks. That is why I want you to know that you can patch things up with me. All right, we can kick it back like it was a drive-through movie in the 1970s. We could get some help from people who actually understand us, refute our standards of stigmatizing mental illness, and fight against the structures that chronically misdiagnose what this really is. Fight against the racism that brings up our mental health issues and lowers our treatment options, bringing us one step closer to seeing no other option. I want us to see that we have a way to heal this wound that has been widening ever since day one with no means of contracting. I want us to know that the seed that we sow today is the harvest we reap tomorrow. And when we finally reap, we can find peace in these moments, noticing that the danger isn't gone, but we finally have a place where it feels like it is. The grounding of black bodies.
So I just want to pick up right from where he all left off, the grounding of black bodies. And he talked about this strength that we've kind of had to have within side of the context of not only society, but also family. Let's speak to society first for a moment. When you consider we just celebrated the 400th biennium here in Virginia of the first African landing on Eastern Shores here in Hampton, Virginia at Port Comfort, Dr. Johnson. There's always this persona that as African Americans, we cannot show our pain or show the emotion of a traumatic experience in our lives. And when you consider the trauma that we've experienced, would it seem to you that pretty much some of all of us need to go and sit down and talk to somebody when many people choose not to? How important is it for us as African Americans to spend some time in therapy, counseling, focusing in on our mental health?
You know, when you think about counseling or, therapy as a whole, it's not a bad idea for anybody at any point in their life. There are so many things that we encounter throughout our lives, growing up. When I teach my classes on developmental psychology, I tell my students all the time that, one of the goals as a parent is to give your child the least amount of baggage that you can, because every parent does pass on some baggage, some things that they've had to endure, some ways that they have picked up over the years that they then pass down to their children. That's not necessarily a good thing. And so being able to go and talk to somebody else to get another perspective on what it is that we're going through is so very important. But of course, we know in our community, it has always been frowned on because what goes on in the house stays in the house. And so to take that dirty laundry, what seems to be dirty laundry, and air it out to other people has always been very taboo. And what we're seeing is that it has put us at quite a bit of a disadvantage. The other thing that's been a big issue is a lack of trust. As people of color, we've had a lack of trust with the medical profession as a whole. So it's not just mental health that we don't seek out. We also don't seek out medical help often when we need it. That's why we wait until things get so severe that we end up in an emergency room instead of getting those regular and routine things done. And so that's something that I think is plaguing our community, and it goes even beyond just what we need to do as far as mental health is concerned.
Dr. Winters, let me also come to you along with that, sir. If you could speak to the need of the importance of ensuring that we have some access toward mental health services within inside of the construct of our communities. How important is that from your perspective?
Just even from what Dr. Johnson said, it's the total gamut of healthcare within itself. And when you talk about access, even with mental health, you can start with healthcare. In the South down here, there are areas where they've completely taken away hospitals, where people have died in 5 o'clock traffic trying to get to a hospital when they've removed hospitals from the Black communities. So you don't have access to medical health care. And then when you get into mental health care, we don't have enough people that look like us that can really be culturally competent and share what we're trying to say. So many times in my practice, people will come in and say, I had to teach my therapist these things about my community so that they can understand. And oftentimes when people say, I've been through something traumatic, and a therapist replies with something like, well, why didn't you call law enforcement or something like that? Well, number one, you're blaming the victim. Number two, you aren't taking into account that law enforcement might not have been a safer route for them. And so when we talk about access to mental health in general, we're talking about access to culturally competent clinicians. And in our area, that's what's most important, because we need services that are going to meet us where we are. So when we talk about cultural competency and we talk about access, there was a meme that was being shared about, I don't want to have to explain what my slangs mean to my therapist, or it slows down my therapeutic process. So when we talk about access, there's a lot of people providing services, but are they culturally competent that meet the need of the clients that we serve? And so even when we start saying, okay, well, I need services. Now, number one, we don't talk about it. I've actually had someone call me and whisper on the phone, like, do y'all need some, y'all provide counseling? And you know, I've had people come into my office with sunglasses on, many things like that, you know, we don't talk about the stigma that's associated with it. And that within itself just goes to show what we don't have in our community. And so for me, I'm like a walking billboard. We're going to talk about mental health. One of the main reasons I named my office Winters Mental Health and Consulting, because I wanted to put the name smack dab in it, so that we can take away the idea that because you are currently going through something that's mentally uneasy doesn't mean you can't make it through it.
It's not a bad idea.
So, and that's kind of my 2 cents about mental health and healthcare in general.
Yeah. So you both of you all have just gone exactly right where I want to go. The taboo idea of having to go and sit down and talk with someone to make sense of a present reality. And you brought up some valid points in regards to the cultural communication of being able to explain the didactic and the communication of how we talk with each other inside of an African-American context. And so one of the things I want to start with is I want to start with children first. We'll come to the adults in just a moment. But what COVID-19 literally did was when governors all throughout the 50 United States begin to have everyone sheltering in place, that threw off kind of the equilibrium of most families. Most families at least have one adult or someone that is working in the home. And then there are childcare issues that take place, and we'll speak to some of that in a minute. But what I made note of was the social and cultural kind of transition that children had to go through. And as much as young people are engaged in the use of technology through social media, and that's how they connect with each other, there's still something to be said for the physical connection of connecting with their peer group while they're at school. The social dynamic of that is also incorporated into the learning process. And so children were really impacted by this. Dr. Johnson, let me just start with you. How have you seen this impact young adults on the college campus? You have children yourself, and then also primary age children. Should we be taking a good look at how we provide services to them as a result of COVID-19?
Yeah, a lot of kids have been very stressed out. And I know, especially in our community, we don't always buy into the fact that children can be stressed because, we have the idea in our community that, if you're not an adult, if you ain't got no bills, you ain't got nothing to worry about. You can go somewhere and sit down.
Right.
But for, a lot of our children really did experience stress with this whole transition. And, especially our, kids moving to learning online. That is something that's not easy for everyone. That's not easy for all adults to be able to do. Right. And so to ask them to make that transition was a big one. I know for one of my daughters, my youngest daughter, who is in school, she's just finished up her second year at Hampton University. And she literally was sitting in front of the computer some days for 10 hours a day in classes, because she's in the architecture program, very rigorous program. Yep. And she was spending hours on end in front of the computer. And then on top of that, professors were expecting an enormous amount of work to be done. And so she was stressed trying to manage all of that and trying to figure it out. My son, who's in high school, he's very laid back. So in the beginning, he was cool with being home until it had been a few days, and now we're into a couple of weeks. And it's like, right. Wow. I didn't realize how much I really missed my friends. Mm-hmm. And I think for a lot of kids and young adults, they didn't necessarily even realize how much they would miss that one-on-one interaction. And so for children who may already have been suffering with some mental health issues or may have some underlying issues going on that nobody was even aware of before, this is something that may have exacerbated those things. And then now we may be seeing coming, as time goes on, a fallout from this time.
Yeah. Dr. Winters, as well, sir, just what have you been able to see so far in your practice? Have people been coming to you with some of the stress that the children are experiencing? Let's just speak to them first. Let me just have you speak to that.
Yes, for some of the kids, we've seen, as she said, a new process of learning, an abrupt change in the way their day-to-day have went. And, as Dr. Johnson said, there's only so much home children can take. Right. At first they were married to the games. Oh, I get to play my game all day. I can be on Facebook, Snapchat with my friends all day. And so in the beginning, you kind of seeing that, oh, I'm loving it. And then like a light switch, I hate it. I'm ready to go back. I'm ready for things to be normal. I can't sit in the house. And so then you get a lot of, when you start looking at like this type of anxiety where they start trying to predict the future, they start trying to guess through things. And it really becomes this cycle of frustration that they're putting themselves through. And really just have to ground them back to the idea of kind of what's going on with this COVID thing. Are you safe? Are you healthy? Are you taken care of? Is there anything in your family right now that's causing you to be stressed out or traumatic in the immediate sense? And we have to deal with things minute by minute, hour by hour until something changes that. And so rescoping ideas like what can you do during this time to manage that stress and anxiety? And so one thing is stay focused on the present. What are you looking for each day when something happens? Creating a structured routine. Making sure that you're probably eating at some decent times, because, once we lay back, we started doing a lot of things we typically wouldn't do, like eating at 2:00 in the morning.
Right.
And so the kids in general, it was almost like this big old wave of like this. Everything was good, and then it started sinking, and then you kind of get out to some level of homeostasis, some level of kind of existing through this as best as they know how. But a lot of it has been more increased conflict with their parents. They've never spent this much time together. And so if there was already some existing poor relationship, it kind of exacerbated.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I want to
kids
speak to that. I want to speak to that right there. Some things parents didn't necessarily know. I had a conversation with, one of my older girls and one of the younger girls. And the older girl said to me, I didn't realize she really wasn't feeling me like that before I went off to college. And if I had not had a conversation with her to be able to resolve some things between the two of us, we would have gone on through life as if, being standoffish with each other and not understanding why. Let me, Dr. Winters, I'm gonna come back to you. Dr. Johnson, how do parents work with children and the interdynamics between siblings with each other, that now this exacerbation of how true feelings come out? What are some of the things that parents can do in terms of, I don't even know if this is the correct term. You guys are the experts, you tell me. It's almost as if they're mediating between the dynamics of relationships between the children.
Absolutely. You really have to communication.
Yeah.
As a parent, that is something that we should be starting with our children from the time they are born. Because the more open the lines of communications are with our kids, the more they will be able to express to us those things that are really on their hearts and on their minds. And again, this sort of can come into that cultural piece where for some families in our community, there's still this mindset of, well, children ought not say these things, or children have to stay in a child's place. And trust me, I'm all for that. And I'm not at all suggesting that children be disrespectful. However, we do have to give children a place to be able to voice what it is that's going on with them in an arena that is respectful. And so sometimes coming together and being able to set up some parameters and saying, hey, okay, in this group, in this moment, you are able to share whatever it is on your heart. These are the rules. There's no cussing. There's no yelling. Whatever those boundaries are, you set it, and then you allow them to express. And sometimes they'll tell you things that may not make you feel all that good. They may tell you that they don't really like some of the things that you're doing. And as a parent, we have to be responsible enough to hear our children and then assess what it is that they're saying, because we're not always right. And sometimes
she done went there.
There are times where we need to go back and say, you know what, I was wrong.
Wow.
And I'm sorry. And what we do when we do that is we teach them how to interact with people and how to be able to navigate difficult things in relationships, because we have to remember that we're helping them to set a model for the relationships they will have as adults.
Right.
And so if we set a model of dysfunctionality in their childhood, then when they go on to have their families or their adult relationships, then they're going to begin to exhibit those same things.
Dr. Winters, let me just come right to you with that. As a licensed, clinical social worker and supervisors of others, I'm sure that if we use this term, now I'm in jest tonight, but I'm gonna use this term. You represent the people. When they're gonna call the people on you, and the people gonna come to your house. And you know how some of us African Americans do. Well, call the people on me. I actually literally here in Virginia, I served on the Board of Social Services here in Virginia, was the Eastern Region representative. And so I've even been there in that kind of moment. How you gonna call the people on me and I am the people? What is it that you're talking about? So oftentimes when you are in those dynamics and you're providing, counseling services, you're doing assessments and that kind of thing, how often, if you could give a percentage, how often is there an impact from a child who has become an adult that says, because my family dynamic was not the way that Dr. Johnson is describing, open communication, transparency, clarity, barriers along with boundaries at the same time. How often have you seen the impact of that in an adult, or the lack thereof in an adult?
Ooh, that's in our community, it's very high. And Dr. Johnson she hit the nail on the head. But in the South, we have a saying, children are to be seen and not heard. And so what happens is we talk about that complete dismissal of a child's feelings. And so what we're saying is what we're saying matters and what you're saying does not matter. And so what happens is these children grow up to become adults who have learned to dismiss their feelings themselves because it's been put upon them so much. And so what happens is they come into therapy. And so when we go through that regimen of childhood trauma and we're going to how that inner child was silenced, you know, how that child, that inner child was told, you don't have a right to feel sad. You don't have a bill to pay. You don't have anything. I should be sad because all of this work I have to do just to take care of you. And so then you have this backwards progression of where the parent is blaming the child for the work that they have to do when the parent had the child and owned up the responsibility of taking care of the child.
Say that one more time, because that went by too fast. Because you sound like the minister of music right now. I know you retired from the church, but you do that for me one more time.
But it's basically a dismissal of feelings.
Okay.
And so when you have a dismissal of a child's feelings, they grow up and that inner child dismisses their feelings automatically. So they have an inability to love others. So what happens is even the parent goes and says, well, you know, I should be sad because I have to take care of you. And so the parent is putting their issues on the child. So the child is now owning the parent's feelings.
Wow.
And it becomes this thing where this child, you can see him coming. And I bet Dr. Johnson can relate to this. When you see a person that is seeking approval of everybody at all time, and they're minimizing themselves at the expense of making sure that everybody likes them, because that's what they've been trained to do for so long that they haven't unlearned that I can set boundaries for myself, that I can have a voice, that I can speak up for myself. And if I don't do it, there are not many people who will.
My goodness. So he just kind of laid the plate right here. Dr. Johnson, you serve in a leadership role, not only within your church, but the reformational movement that you lead alongside with your husband. Oftentimes, many times when people are coming to our services or our doors are asking for counseling moments, what percentage would you say that what people are dealing with is a childhood trauma of not being affirmed, not being heard, and seeking affirmation in terms of their behaviors?
Oh, it's very high. Absolutely, it's very high. We see it all the time. And something else that we need to just say about our children and the impact of this COVID-19 on our children. We also have to recognize that for a lot of our children, going to school, going to after school programs and all of those things was a safe place.
Right.
And that safe place was then snatched out from under them. And so now they're left in homes where they're not all in the safest environments. They're left in homes with perpetrators. They're left in homes with abusers who are now stressed out because they've lost their jobs, or, you know, now they're having to stay at home. They're having to deal with all of these different environments and different personalities and all of this stuff that's happening inside the home. And so that is one of the biggest things that I think in the mental health field, we need to be looking out for the fallout of that. Because now where are the teachers that were the mandated reporters are not seeing what they would typically see. And all of the people in these different places who would typically be there to have an eye on that child, who may have caused that perpetrator to think twice before they beat them into oblivion. Now they're not there because guess what? They know you're not going anywhere. So now you have children that are not being protected anymore. So yes, we have some of the things going on with the family dynamics and siblings that are not getting along and voicing those opinions, and we shouldn't downplay those at all. But we also have this other thing that's going on in our community and in our homes that we're not giving a lot of voice to, and that is that children are being abused at a higher rate. Rates of domestic violence calls have gone up in all of this time. Why? Because people are more stressed. And when people are more stressed, they tend to act out more. And so that is something that we definitely are going to have to look at moving forward. And even as people are coming into the church, as the churches are reopening, you're going to be talking about people coming back into the church. Some people are going to be even more broken than when they left. And as pastors, we have to recognize what our job is and what our lane is, and when we should then, refer them to somebody else that can be in another lane, because everything cannot be prayed away.
Right. Oh my, Dr. Winter, she went there. I know
that gets into sticky, that gets into murky waters.
She went there.
Some things.
Wait a minute.
So before.
Wait a minute. Now look, now I gotta, this is my frat brother, and he don't know you like I know you for what she just said. She is the overseer alongside the bishop of a Pentecostal alliance of churches.
Mhm.
And us Pentecostal people, we believe in bringing the oil out, sling the oil out. We're going to pray an oil, slap it on you, and we're going to ta, he coming on a Hyundai. I mean, is there some validity to what she's saying, Dr. Withers, in terms of some stuff? Now, you've served in church as a musician over 20 years. Some stuff we can't pray out. We have to sit down and talk it and reason it out. What do you say to that?
I don't think it's either or. You can have Jesus and a therapist. I hear that phrase all the time, and that's the reality. Because even some things that we use in study, like meditation, things like that. I mean, you can use that in a spiritual sense. But if you say, "Hey, look, I'm gonna go pray these things away," and you get up and you do nothing about it, well, I mean, we already know faith without works is dead.
Right.
You're looking for the gift to come through you to go and seek what you need. So go talk to your therapist, work some things out, pray, continue, do both.
Mm-hmm.
Because
why don't people, particularly African American community, churchgoers, profess to love Jesus, whether they're of the AME, Kojic, Baptist, PAW, charismatic, non-denominational? We don't believe in going to talk to nobody. Why are we like that?
You want me to answer that question?
I want you to go first, and then I will have Dr. Johnson go.
Because the problem is that the origination of the church, if you look all the way back to Montgomery bus boycotts, anything like that, the first bus boycott started where I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Mm-hmm. And guess what? They used one of the main churches as the hub. So the church has always been the hub, but sometimes the church centered themselves in this area and they didn't want to expand into other areas. So many pastors, I've had debates with pastors that'll tell me, well, we teach people how to pray, and if they pray enough, anything that they're going through is going to be gone. Okay. If you feel that, does everybody else feel that around you? So we cannot be the gatekeepers of things around us that ain't working. If you are diabetic, you ain't going to church and praying and leaving your insulin at the doctor's office. You're going to go pray and touch and agree for that to happen, and then you're going to go pick up that insulin and go. And mental health should not be treated as a stepchild when it comes down to getting things done. Mm-hmm. Because we do know that, suicides among African-American males between the ages of 13 and 21 are going up, and they're steadily increasing. And so basically you have some people that are going to church and sticking their heads in the sand. And that's basically what I tell some people. You go to church and you pray and you walk out the door and you stick your head in the sand and you don't really look for the signs and you don't look for the things that are needed when it comes down to mental health issues. And just being in the Deep South, people have come to me, we took her to church and we almost bathed her in holy oil, and we didn't get anything to work. Okay, well, look, try Jesus, try a therapist. You don't have to pick between both. You can do both. It's not one or the other. And so when we adopt that, you need pastors that, and for me, I've told pastors, you have to learn how to stay in your lane. If you don't have them initials behind your name that says that you've been qualified to treat these things, you shouldn't be doing that. And so we're trying to make things an end all meet all instead of a cohabitative unit that can work together. Yeah. I grew up in the church. If church is your thing, we can pray together before our session starts. We can pray together at the end of our session. You can go to church. You can come back and tell me what worked for you in church. And I'm going to tell you the things that we use in addition to that, and we can work together because there's research that shows the combination is most effective.
Yeah. So Dr. Johnson, you started to go there already early tonight. So now, from your perspective, why aren't we embracing psychology and sociology in terms of having a therapist, counseling, clinicians speak to us and talk to us to help us in terms of our mental outlook of how we're seeing the world? Why aren't we doing that as African Americans and churchgoers?
I think in the church, we have to, the leadership of the church has to embrace, because there is, especially, in the African American community, we follow what our pastors tell us.
Right.
And so when our pastors look down on something, we tend to steer away
There
from
it
it.
is. Mm-hmm.
When they validate something, then we tend to go with it. And
Mhm.
so as we are starting to see more pastors begin to embrace the idea of incorporating the use of counseling and the importance of mental health services for their parishioners, you're starting to see more people opening up to the idea that, okay, maybe it is okay for me to go, because there's a lot of hurdles we have to jump in order to make it to that first session. And when you have someone, because a lot of times the first person we'll go to and talk to is our pastor or an elder or a leader in our church, a deacon, a mother, or somebody. And so when we have a setting in the church where we understand that, yes, I can pray with you, but like Mr. Winters has said, look, there are some things that I'm gonna need to refer you to somebody else. And every church should have a list of counselors that they refer members to, because everything, number one, we shouldn't be mixing and mingling people's mental health issues with what's going on with our worship services. As a pastor, as a leader, you really should be referring your members to somebody else. Now, if you have a practice and you are a mental health professional, that's fine, but it's still not best practice for you to treat your own members. Right. It's way too murky. There's way too many issues, because you will have a session with them and then the Lord will give you a message. And if it hits home, they'll declare you are preaching about what they just told you in the middle of their session.
Wait a minute.
Just keep things separate and refer them to somebody else.
Yeah.
And once we find more leaders who are willing to do that, then we'll start to see that. The Bible says there's safety in a multitude of counsel.
Mm-hmm.
So, you don't have to be the only counselor. And that's sometimes, in the Black church, we become very territorial. We don't want nobody saying nothing to our members. First of all, they're not our members. They don't belong to us anyway.
Right.
And so therefore, we have to begin to make those relationships. We should be making those connections with people in the community. As a pastor, you need to know some therapists in the community. So if someone comes to you with a problem, you're able to give a good recommendation.
Mm-hmm. So really for us, we deal with the spiritual issues in terms of your connection between you and God, the development of what I would call the Ephesians or Galatians chapter 5, fruit of the spirit kind of stuff in your life, in terms of character traits that cause you to be reflective of God's image in you. But there's so many traumas that people experience. You all have already alluded to one already with sheltering in place. So now you've got issues of domestic violence, abuse that is happening with children. Now let's kind of shift a little bit to the abuse that's taking place between spouses or people who are cohabitating with each other, and also doing that also right there in the church in terms of their communication, the physicality that is taking place. Are those issues, as you see them, are those mental health issues? Are those spiritual issues? Are those economic issues? Are those physiological issues? Or is it all in there together? What say ye? I'm going to come to you first, Brother Winters, and then we're going to come back to Mother and Zion up there in the top part of the screen.
For me, it's some of everything. I mean, I've seen people who've lost jobs. I've seen couples who they were hanging on by a strand, to go to work for 10 hours each and then come home and go to sleep. Well, that was their way of hanging on. And then working from home forced them to be around each other 10 extra hours a day without going to sleep. And so it's only going to be a matter of time before the things that you left on the table that you didn't decide to go for are going to manifest themselves. So when those things come up, then, it all breaks loose. Everything that you've been fighting or going through, and I don't do couples counseling, but I've worked with, I work with the individual adults who would invite their significant other to a session. And some of the things is, I've noticed that they don't talk about, hey, we've been at home for the first, the last 2 or 3 months together. They started bringing up everything from like the last 4 or 5 years that they've never dealt with. Along with, we now have to communicate a little bit more because the money is slimmer. We have to communicate a little bit more because somebody might be sick or infected with COVID. We have to communicate a little bit more because we are experiencing our own trauma from this sudden shift of getting up and going to work every day to now working from home. If you have kids, you're managing multiple roles while you're in the house right now. You're trying to do whatever you need to do for your job online, manage your kids. If they're doing homeschool work, ensuring what they're doing. If the kids get younger, the stress gets higher. And so you are, so.
Wait. I don't want you to go past that too fast. As the kids get younger, with younger children, the stress is higher. Is that because this 10 to 12 hour a day professional is now having to communicate with this 5, 6, 7, 4, and 3-year-old and do the role of what the primary teacher would do, the daycare worker would do, and there's a disconnect that's happening between the communication between the two? That's a mental health issue, is what you're saying to me right now?
Well, it's an adjustment. It's a hard adjustment, because you're now trying to work 10 hours a day and manage your child. If they have jobs or they have anything that they're working on, I mean, if they have school, then you have to ensure that their schoolwork is being done.
Right.
You know, I have a kindergartner, you know, so thank God for my wife, you know, because I see clients. So I have to shut myself in the room and see clients, but he had schoolwork that needed to be done because we weren't finished with the year. So we were trying to play a balancing act between each other, which requires, as Dr. Johnson said, it requires a lot of communication. It required me to say, hey, look, I can take some steps back and say, okay, I'm gonna see this many clients, come back and do this work in this amount of time, and then go back and see more clients. And it requires that level of communication. If you didn't have that level of communication before this hit, it's a walking bomb. It's going to explode, because you're taking on so many multiple tasks at one time. You know, there's no way I can see a client and say, hey, look, I need you to go ahead and finish that worksheet right there, and go back to someone, you know, talking about the stressors that they're going through. So that communication is important, but it's so many things. You know, I have people who've lost jobs. You know, they're literally having to move. They're having to downsize and sell houses. Can you imagine? Just selling a house with 2 people having a job is stressful. You know, so trying to do that in the midst of, you don't have money, you're literally you're doing a short sale or something, and you already don't get along with your partner, but it's things that you left on the table 4 or 5 years ago that you should have dealt with. And so that within itself, that's just so much. You only have so much of your cup that before it overfloods. And really and truly, COVID then took up 60 or 70% of the cup already.
My mind, y'all are laying it right on out the way that it needs to be laid out. I would dare say that as I said before, COVID-19 has either revealed some things that have been hidden, or it has exposed some things or concealed some things that has lied beneath. And so I want to speak to that just for a moment. Dr. Johnson, you already began to allude to some of the issues of domestic violence that is already consistent within the dynamic of some relationships. Sometimes as a result of the trauma of that experience, some people will begin to feel like, you know what, it's not worth me being here, being alive. So the thoughts of suicide running through the minds of people as a means of escape. Now, we know from a spiritual perspective that that our adversary is the father of lies and will speak those kinds of things into the ears of people. But there's got to be a source from somewhere where that begins to now become operational for it to be valid enough for you to feel like it's not worth it in terms of living each and every day. Some of the things that I believe that are hidden, that are now kind of being concealed. How does a person understand that there's a mental health issue going on with the issue of anger?
Well, isolation is a very, very tricky thing. Okay. Because isolation, for a lot of people who are dealing with any types of abusers, one of their tools and techniques is isolation, pull a person away. And so to be under this, shelter in place order for all of these weeks was it could have created a perfect storm in some people's lives. Because now this person who operates in manipulation, this person who operates in this kind of idea of wanting to pull you away now has a really good a really good excuse to keep you isolated from family, isolated from friends, isolated from those things that have been your source of strength in times past. And so, when people are, dealing with things like anger, when people are dealing with things like depression, and then we add stress into the mix of all of that because of all of the uncertainty that we've had, for people who may still have had jobs, it was still an idea of things being uncertain. What's going to happen in the next 3 weeks, in the next 4 weeks? How are things going to progress? And that stress, can really begin to exacerbate those things that are already underlying, as we've been saying, tonight. If you're already dealing with anxiety, you're already dealing with if you're already an abuser, or you have already had that kind of history. So maybe you have never been abusive before. However, you were managing that anger and that frustration by leaving the house, by going to the gym, by doing certain things as an outlet for yourself. When all of those things, when all of those coping mechanisms have been taken away, then what does a person do? And I think that's where we've seen some people begin to falter in all of this, is now what do I do that all of my coping mechanisms have been taken? And if you are not strong enough to be able to find some other means of coping, because there are some things that we can still do to cope even when we are in the midst of this, then you can find yourself in a situation where you are grappling with those real difficult things.
So talking about coping mechanisms of how people can begin to orient themselves mentally to the trauma and impacts of their lives, the sheltering in place, the lack of resources that are not necessarily as readily available as it could be or should be in some of our dynamics. One person I've heard say, when America gets the flu, when America catches a cold, Black community gets the flu. That sort of thing. So down there in the South, you're in the state with the highest cases reported of COVID-19. I am absolutely certain that your log of persons who are coming to see you should probably be higher, Dr. Winters, than what it already is. How do we get people to talk about the issues that they are facing inside of their dynamic? Because we're still dealing with the taboo issue of having to go talk to somebody. How do we get people? How do we transition our communities, religious African American or just African American communities as a whole, to see this as valuable and valid?
I think we've been doing a lot of promotions, a lot of engagements, but really and truly, so many people have reached their breaking point to we've seen an influx of phone calls.
Wow.
And I think that in substance abuse, people will call it a rock bottom. And I just think that people have just, it's so much, and I've had people call me, look, man, I've tried praying. Okay, let's sit down and talk about it. Let's do a needs assessment. Let's see where you are. What do you need? Did you lose your job? We need to make sure that you have your first block, food, safety, and shelter. And so we can't perform those services. I can't say, hey, look, let's work on these mental health issues, and psychological needs is number 3. So I can't provide these services if you struggling for food. And so if you're struggling for housing, things like that, we have to first stabilize that. So we need resources in the community, in which in Louisiana, there's a lot of resources that has come through. And specifically, the thing with the extra $600 for unemployment, some people were making more on unemployment than they were on a regular daytime job, because down here we follow the standard federal minimum wage, which is $7.25 an hour, and so some people who had lost jobs, they were coming out better on unemployment. I was like, hey, go make your money. So, but once we get let's get those basic needs established, and after that, let's talk about the psychological needs. what's going on psychologically and physiologically with you that we can kind of work through. And so a lot of it is just this hard adjustment. It's like one day you're going to the office, the next day they said, man, you got to stay at home.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if it's people who lost their job, it's like one day you have a job, the next day you don't, with unforeseen futures and even the stress of they may be cutting off unemployment. So some of the things we do is we talk about what can we do in this situation, as I mentioned earlier. A lot of it is we're going to ground ourselves back to reality, like the guy said in the video. Grounding of African Americans, we have a grounding technique. 5 things you see, 4 things you hear. And we go through that, and we work through that, and we process first, second, third, and fourth thought. Are you operating from the fourth thought, which is more than likely unrealistic, or are you operating for the first thought that comes to your mind, but the one that you rejected initially? You know, because a lot of times we reject what's right there in front of us, which is probably the accurate answer, because that's not what our anxiety is not going to feel that first thought. But so we'll go to a second, a third, and a fourth, and the fourth is the one that we believe, but it's the most unrealistic one. And so that's one of the biggest processes I'll write it down on the board. What was the first thought? What was the second thought? What was the third thought? What was the fourth thought? And we'll just kind of process it. And we'll say, which one is more likely to be unrealistic that we can get rid of, so that we can stop operating out of this realm of unrealistic thoughts, because that's where that core source of anxiety is. It's that fear of things that are unknown, that fear of things that are not actually in front of us. You know, even that trauma part of it. You know, what do you have physiologically that's going on that may facilitate trauma? One of the best books I've ever read was The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, is like leading trauma. But he talks about what happens in our body when we have these energies, when we have all of these things, and we don't know, we have this unconscious thought that we hadn't put to it. I lost my job. I'm going to be homeless. I don't have anything that's going to, take care of me or survive. I have no other choice. And that's when people get into, physiologically, your body's just responding to that. And so we work through all of those things, calming that body, calming that mind, because they have to work together.
So Dr. Johnson, in this, he's brought in the physiological part, the financial, the economic, the domestic sheltering in place part. I'm sure somebody is watching us tonight as we prepare to wrap this up, and thank you all for being in. How do we get people to talk about what's going on? We still have this saying inside of the African American community, if I use it in this context, snitches get stitches. How do we get people to start to talk about some of the mental anxiety, anguish, and frustrations they're dealing with as we come into the aftermath of COVID-19? And then speak to it from the ministry standpoint. What should pastors be looking for in their congregations to help direct them to receive services? So 1, how do we get people talking? 2, how do we now assess where people are to start recommending them towards services?
So having forums like this, the ability for people to have a safe place to be able to come and talk is going to be one of the things that's really important. So opening up a dialogue like this for somebody to be able to hear and say, hey, you know what, that sounds like something that makes sense to me. That's one of the things that I think is important. The other thing that I think is so very important is going to be people just are going to have to be courageous enough to do something they've never done before. Anytime we go to do something that's different or something that we've never done before, we will be apprehensive about doing it. But what we have to understand is that if we want things to change in our life, it's going to require us to do things that we've never done before. If we want to continue in the same state, then we'll continue to do those same things. But whenever we want change, whenever we want to see something move or be different, it requires the addition of something that is different. If you want your recipe to taste different, you want your pound cake to taste different, you're going to have to add a different ingredient in it. If you don't want a lemon pound cake, then you take the lemon out and you put more butter in. Whatever the case, it's the same thing with our lives. We have to make sure, or we have to be courageous enough to take the step and say, you know what? I want something different for me. Yeah, my mom may not have done it. My auntie and them may not have done it. They may have thought people were crazy for doing it, but I want something different for me. We live in a day and time where there is so much information out there. And so honestly, we go to, Google for everything else. We go to YouTube for everything else. There's no reason for us not to be in a place now where we can step out and say, you know what, I've heard enough, because mental health, as much as it's still an issue in our community, it's been promoted tremendously in our community.
Yes, it is.
And so now it's just time to make the decision. So I'll say to anybody that's listening on tonight, really, it's just about you being courageous enough to take a step. Take a step in the right direction for change for your life. You will never regret it. You'll never regret it. I will give this caveat. Finding a good therapist is not always the easiest thing in the world. But you do have to, but it's something worth striving for. So just because you go to the first person and they weren't a good fit for you, don't give up. Don't stop there. Just because that person wasn't a good fit for you, try somebody else, because there is someone out there that will be a good fit for you, that will be able to help you through the things that you're going on. And when we talk about the church, we need to have more opportunities for people to be able to talk. We need to have more, in our Bible studies, in our midweek, sessions, once a month, once a quarter, something needs to be done where we're bringing in people who will have a session where we're not just singing and dancing and shouting and preaching, but we're actually taking the time to stop and be able to share with people in a safe setting. So that's going to be important as we're going back into the church, that pastors are setting up environments where people feel comfortable enough to say, we need to have trainings for our staff, so that because everybody doesn't go to the senior pastor. So when they come and talk to you as a person on the staff, we're all speaking the same language. We're all saying the same thing. We know exactly what to say, and we know exactly who we're referring them to. No, we don't want you doing any sidebar counseling, because that's not your job.
That's good.
We want this thing to be handled. And when we start to do those things, then the word gets out, because we like to talk.
Yeah.
So the word will begin to get out that, if you go talk to brother so-and-so or deacon so-and-so or mother, whatever, she'll give you some numbers that you can call to help. We'll whisper that to somebody, and then the word will get out. But we have to set it up in our churches so that we're there to receive people when they have these problems.
Now let me just translate that for the listening audience. What you're literally saying is, pastors, here's how you kill the parking lot prophets in your church that cause a whole lot of unnecessary destruction. And you got people who are pastoring your congregation by providing counsel to people, speaking a word to people. You can have a sense of uniformity of how we're going to address sociological, financial, economic, and spiritual issues, and who is authorized to do so inside of a local church context. Have you seen, Brother Winters, down in your area where people are able to refer services out? Because everybody wants to come talk to the pastor, but sometimes what I've seen work very well is some pastors will have an intake form where you write out really a short description of what it is you're coming to talk about. And at that moment, they are able to clearly be able to say, this is a spiritual issue, or this is a mental or a financial or a psychological. Is that something that is working in your area, or is that something that kind of needs to evolve from your experience?
I think for me, being a music director for a long time, I built relationships with pastors in the area, but I've always made it a point to talk mental health with them, because, I've been in the mental health field. I've been licensed for like 4 years, but I've been working in settings for 15, I've always made it a point to talk about mental health. And so even in my choir settings, I worked with a children's choir and I worked with an adult choir. I found a way to slide it in there. And so it got to the point to where some pastors would call me and ask me, hey, look, we're going through this thing. Can you work with them? Can you see them? We know what you do. And so I think that the challenge for the mental health issues, and I'm going to speak for the mental health clinicians, is we have to go in and talk. We know where the issues are. The pastors have to be open and saying, hey, we don't understand your part. You may not understand our part, but we can work together to ensure an outcome. So I've had pastors call me directly and say, hey, look, we're having these issues. Is there anything that you can help with? I'm like, yes, cool. Send them and we'll have a referral. But I've actually worked with some pastors that said, we don't support that. We don't believe in that. We're not sending our people over there. One of them referred to white man's workings of therapy or something like that. And I'm like, there's so many, there's so many people that you can work with. I mean, especially if they're culturally competent. And I go to cultural competence because here we're lacking. I'm in a city of over 200 and something thousand people, and I think I may be the only Black male in private practice that specializes in children. I'm not saying I'm the only one, but I know of maybe a few, but they're not in private practice. And so we're lacking in that area. So we need people to get that trained. We need people to get that understanding, to get that work and get that skill set behind them so that they're able to go in and say, hey, look, we can work with you. Now I'm gonna speak again as a mental health clinician. Stop trying to get these people to come in and do like these 15-part segments and you saying, oh, well, we can just donate your whole 15-part segment, and not really help you in some kind of way. Yeah. And that's what Al found. Sometimes they want you to come and talk, or they want you to deliver this big old thing, and they're not understanding that time costs money, and you got these letters behind your name that came at a price. And so the church has been a focus in the African American community for a long time, but we have to make sure we're following the entire gamut. Make sure that we're talking about mental health issues. There should not be a reason that you lose someone to suicide and you did not know what's going on if that person is in your church every Wednesday, Sunday in the choir, on the deacon board, dance team, and all that things, and you're not talking to them. How is your mental health? What's going on with you emotionally? How have you been feeling?
This is so good. So Dr. Johnson, getting people to talk from the leadership side, having an intake form where you can have assessments that are made, staffing things out to actually be able to go to the professionals that are in the field without clergy feeling like we still got this whole thing of somebody gonna steal my members, that kind of thing, that kind of stuff. I often would say this, and sometimes it's got to start at the top down. And there are some issues that are spiritual and are doctrinal, and then there are some that are emotional and that are where psychosis is needed. And I believe Jesus ministered in both realms as he dealt with people, and it's going to be incumbent upon us to be able to do the same. Having gone through trauma in my own life, one of the best things, it took me 3 to 4 years of going back down and out and giving a commercial to Living Waters Ministry down in Hidden Night, North Carolina, with some country people that don't look like me, but were able to speak my language in such a way with Denise and Lee Boggs. I recommend anybody go there. They are able to speak to the spiritual dynamics of your life, but also speak clinically to some of the emotional issues that you experience. How important do you believe it is, Dr. Johnson, for pastors themselves and those who lead the church to participate in therapy that is either ongoing or something that is either short stints, 5, 6 weeks here at a time, 2 to 3 weeks here at a time, in terms of being able to communicate what has gone on in their own lives so that they're in a place that's healthy? How important is that from your vantage point?
It's absolutely vital. We know that pastoring is one of the most stressful jobs there is to have. Yep. And it's also a very lonely job to have, because yep. most often as a pastor, you don't have anyone to go to. You don't have anyone that you confide in, that you talk with, that you share with on a regular basis. And so having, if you find yourself, for some pastors, they do have other leaders that they're able to talk to. and share with, so that they can manage some of the things that are going on with them. But even in those cases, if there's something that gets to be beyond the scope of just a spiritual intervention, then it's important for the pastor to go and to seek out counseling. It's just like parents. It's important for parents to lead by example. It's also important for pastors to lead by example. Mm-hmm. So if we want to talk about and encourage other people to take care of their mental health, then it's important for the pastor to do that as well, because there is a difference between mental health and mental illness. Taking care of your mental health can prevent mental illness.
That's good.
And so as pastors, it's important that we do things to take care of our mental health. And so if going to a therapist, once a quarter, once a month, it doesn't have to be every week, is helpful in you being able to cope with the things that come to your table, because a lot of people will bring things to the pastor and dump it on the pastor. But then what does the pastor do with all of these things that they are now charged to carry? Yes, we go to God in prayer, and no one is discounting that at all. However, in addition to prayer, we have to begin to do some things. And so being able to get in with a counselor and talk through those issues and find some good coping strategies will help us not end up with pastors who are committing suicide, will help us not end up with pastors who are being found in, whorehouses and crack houses and all of these other places. Because they're trying to find a method to cope. And now everybody don't want to touch the pastor no more, because now they've fallen and they've got all of this stuff going on. But nobody was paying attention when everybody was pulling from the pastor, and nobody was pouring back into them.
That's so good. Dr. Winters, would you please speak to that issue? How important is it for spiritual leaders to go and see someone and get some help?
I mean, Dr. Johnson hit directly on it. So many, they're pulling, and the pastor's cup is full. I've actually worked with some ministers and pastors and things like that. And so, even in my work, being a leader is hard. Being a leader within itself, just being responsible for so many things and so many people, and just making sure that they have what they need, it takes a lot. And so if you want that total healing, you have to have a place where you can be you. Just where you can be you without the worry of everybody else. And the unfortunate thing is, there's a lot of research that says, pastors are finding themselves in really complicated situations simply because they don't have outlets. Some of the things you hear, when pastors talk about the needs, and we can't act like all of God's people are really coming to church and be holy. Some of these people are crazy. Some of these people bring, they bring nonsense. They come to church to see how much chaos they can carry.
Hello.
You have to have a leadership staff, or you have to have a pastor that's dealing with things like that. And so that takes a toll on you. That takes a toll. I was a director for a long time. You got people that come in and they don't bring God into it. and so that's just stressful to deal with that. So where do you leave that? You carry all of that home with you. You got so much baggage, you can't get in your car and get home well enough. You can't, you have nothing to pour into your family when you get there because of everything that you have dealt with. So where do you leave that? And even as a therapist, where do you leave all that you deal with? I deal with kids, and I've heard some of the most horrific stories that you can have. If I didn't have a therapist, I'd probably been cracked up by now. Because in addition to dealing with, what I hear in my office, I have to come home. I have a wife. I have my own children that I have to deal with. I have to make sure that I'm pouring from a good place. Yeah. Because there are going to be times, even as a therapist, where you're on shaky ground, where it's just time to step away. Even as a pastor, when you're on that shaky ground, you have to be able to recognize that for yourself, because failure to ignore that first thought is when you get into them fourth thoughts that gets really unrealistic. My mind. I can just drink a little bit and that's going to knock the edge off and I can go to sleep. So now I begin to drink as a coping mechanism to cope with the stress that I'm dealing with. So I've learned to use that. Now my body is dependent on it. So I'm no longer using this as a stressor. I'm using this so I can maintain normal.
Wow. So some of the outlets that people get into becomes normalized as a coping mechanism to deal with a present issue that they should be talking to somebody about to get off of them.
Where you become physically dependent on it. Your body has become dependent on the idea, but you use it initially as a coping mechanism. But now you can't go without it because you can't function because you've drank. Your body just depending so much upon what you're drinking that you have to use it. Same thing with drugs, same thing with pornography, same thing with running women, same thing with you. You've done it as a coping mechanism, but now your body depends on it and you don't have dopamine or serotonin levels up high enough to where you're now experiencing this flatline depression.
This is y'all have gone there all the way through. As I promised I would get y'all out of here. We got 3 minutes left, not just when it started getting good. Brother Winters, I'm gonna put you on the spot. There's a panel on next Thursday night with Dr. Johnson, Dr. Najuma Pollard-Smith, Dr. Mason, clinicians and practitioners, where we're gonna delve a little bit deeper, focusing in on strategies for the discovering family dynamics, the aftermath family conference that we'll be having next week. If you can join us, we'd love to have you. Thank you both for being able to share with us tonight. Next week and next Thursday, we're going to get into more strategies. This week was really about kind of diagnosing where we are and the importance of what it is that we need to be doing inside of our communities, inside of our churches, inside even the concept of clergy. If you are a part of Dominion Cathedral or Dominion Alliance of Pentecostal churches, I need you to put the Cash App for Dr. Johnson inside of the comment section. If you are connected with Brother Winters in any way, I'm going to call upon all of my Gamma brothers who may be watching, who will see the replay of this. This brother has his own practice and he's also working. He is a licensed clinical social worker. And also he is board approved to supervise others and give them license. If you are connected with him in any way, they didn't ask me for any kind of honorarium on tonight. I want to make sure that they are blessed because if we were having a full scale conference somewhere, they'd be walking away with a blessing from us here at Dominion. So be sure to put his Cash App information inside of the comment section. Y'all bless them tonight. I'm going to start, Brother Winters, with you. Anything that you want to share in regards to the importance of mental health and why we need it, why we must have it in terms of closing out tonight. And then Dr. Johnson, we'll come to you for the last word. Go ahead, sir.
You know, just as a Black male, we've seen where things have been going in society. And now more than ever, men need to talk about what has been unseen for so long, what we've experienced, the weight that we've carried. And you know, let's learn strategies to move past it and not just try to walk through the mud. Sometimes we have to stop and, you know, take a fresh thing of water and knock all the mud off. So why is it important? Because yes, you may be able to make it through life, but are you making it through the best way you know how, the best way you can? Is there a more optimal way of doing this? You know, we invented cars and got out of horse and carriage because there's a more optimal way of doing it. From cars, we went to planes because there's a more optimal way of doing it. Are we seeking that optimal way? That's what mental health is. That optimal way of existing.
That is so good. Thank you tonight, sir, for your time. We hope that you're able to make it next week. Dr. Johnson, ma'am, the floor is yours.
We've talked about a lot of issues and problems and situations that people are dealing with since this COVID-19. So just to end it a little bit on a happier note, something that's good that we've been noticing that's coming out of this whole idea of sheltering in place is that families are connecting in positive ways as well. There was a report on Good Morning America one day last week that said that fathers are connecting with their children like they have not done in many years. And they're seeing that during this time of sheltering in place. They are playing games with their kids because typically they were out of the house and they were working long hours and they were at the gym and doing all these other things. And now they're connecting with their kids. And we know statistically that children who have an active father in their life tend to be very successful in their lives as they grow up. And so everything that's coming out of this COVID-19 is not all bad. there's some good stuff that's coming out of this as well. So I know we focused a lot on the difficulties, but I just want to end on a good note that there's a lot of family connection that's happening in this. There's a lot of families who, like you mentioned earlier, who have been, have seen themselves more distant in the past, who have come back together since we've had this time of sheltering in place. So this is an optimal time. If you've not connected with somebody, take the time to connect with them. We've got a little bit more time than we've had in the past. So this is a great time to do that. And we will see many great repercussions of that, because every action has a reaction.
Yep.
And so that the reaction that's going to come from these good connections that are happening is going to be awesome as we move beyond this.
So listen, registration will begin to open up on tomorrow, Friday. We have 6 sessions that are going to take place between next Wednesday and next Saturday at noon. Our theme for the conference this year is Discovering Family Dynamics, Recovering from COVID-19, the Aftermath. Brother Winters, we hope that you might be able to join us for that Thursday panel. It's $99 registration. Early bird is good until Monday, but after Monday, it'll be up to $125, but each session is $25. There are sessions at 12 noon. Dr. Johnson will be leading one next Thursday at 12 noon from 12 to 1, and then the panel Thursday night again at 7:30, and then Friday morning, the Brookses will be with us for Marriage and Parenting Successfully. They'll be leading one at 12, and then again at 7:30. We open up Wednesday with Dr. Najuma Smith on Wednesday night, and then breakfast with the Brookses on Saturday. And then we close out in just pure question and answer. So go to www.dow.church, click on the link for the flyer. All the information is there. These will be with us again. So glad y'all were here with us tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all throughout the week. God bless you all. Thank you all for tuning in. Bye-bye.